Let me tell you something that nobody around you is going to say out loud. You are not tired because of your job. You are tired because of what you are doing after your job ends. And those hours, the hours between the time you walk through your front door and the time you fall asleep, those hours are quietly, invisibly determining the entire financial trajectory of the rest of your life. Not your salary, not your 401(k) contribution, not the market. Those hours, the ones you think don't count, the ones you've been wasting in ways that feel completely harmless, even comfortable, but are costing you a fortune in slow motion. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because most people won't. Most people will hear something like that and immediately start defending themselves. They'll say, I work hard, I deserve to relax. And they're right. They do deserve to relax. But here's what nobody explains clearly enough. There is a profound, life-changing difference between rest that restores you and distraction that depletes you. And most of us have confused the two for so long that we genuinely cannot tell them apart anymore. That confusion is costing you. Not in some abstract philosophical sense. In actual dollars, in actual years, in actual freedom that will either be there for you when you're 62 or it won't. And if it isn't there, no amount of clever explanation will change that fact. I am not here to lecture you. I am not here to make you feel bad. I'm here because I've spent a very long time watching how people build wealth and how they don't. And I've noticed that the gap between the two groups almost never comes down to intelligence or income. It comes down to what people do with the small, quiet, ordinary hours that they think don't matter. They matter enormously. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the 5 things I changed about my evenings, the specific habits, the specific shifts in thinking that compounded over time into something that most people never achieve. Not because they couldn't, but because they never made the decision to try. The first thing I stopped doing was making financial decisions at night. This sounds simple. It isn't. When you are tired, your brain shifts into a very particular mode. The prefrontal cortex, the part that does careful, patient, long-term thinking, starts to disengage. What takes over is something more impulsive, more emotional, more reactive. And in that state, you are not making investment decisions. You are making feelings-based decisions that are dressed up to look like investment decisions. I cannot tell you how many people I have watched sell a perfectly good position at 10 o'clock at night because the market had a rough day and they spent 3 hours reading panic commentary online. They wake up the next morning, the market opens higher, and they've locked in a loss that took 18 months to generate. They did it in an evening. They did it when they were tired, a little anxious, and sitting alone with a screen that was designed, very carefully designed, to make them feel like something urgent needed to be done. Nothing urgent needed to be done. One of the quietest truths in all of investing is this: most of the time, the right action is no action. The best investors I've ever studied share one trait that doesn't get nearly enough attention. They are extraordinarily comfortable doing nothing. Not because they are lazy, because they understand that the market rewards patience and punishes urgency, and they have arranged their evenings in a way that does not tempt them to confuse activity with progress. So I made a rule. Simple, almost embarrassingly simple. No investment decisions after 8 o'clock in the evening, not a purchase, not a sale, not even a serious research session designed to lead to a purchase or a sale. If I find myself reaching for the brokerage account at night, I write down what I was thinking about and I revisit it the next morning when my mind is clear. 9 times out of 10, the urgency is completely gone by morning. The decision that felt critical at 10 p.m. looks obviously premature at 7 a.m. That gap, that overnight gap, has saved me from more mistakes than I can count. The second thing I changed was how I consumed financial information in the evenings. Most people in this country consume financial news the way they consume fast food. Constantly, reflexively, without ever really asking whether it's nourishing them or just filling space. They have cable news on in the background. They scroll financial Twitter. They read comment sections on market articles, and they feel like they are staying informed. They feel like this is responsible, like this is what a serious investor does. It is not. Here is what the financial media is actually doing in most cases. It is filling 24 hours of airtime with content that, in terms of meaningful information for a long-term investor, could be summarized in about 4 minutes per week. The rest of it is noise. And noise is not neutral. Noise is actively harmful because it creates a false impression that everything is urgent, that markets are chaotic, that there is always something you should be doing differently than what you're currently doing. Think about the year 2020, March 2020, to be specific. If you were watching financial news during those evenings, you were watching the end of the world being narrated in real time. Experts, credentialed, confident, compelling experts were explaining why this was different, why the old rules didn't apply, why the recovery could take a decade. And people listened and people sold. And the market hit its low on March 23rd and then spent the next 18 months on one of the most powerful rallies in modern history. The people who made money in that period were not the ones who watched the most news. They were the ones who, in many cases, watched the least. They had a thesis. They trusted it. They went to bed. I'm not saying ignore the world. I'm saying be deliberate about what you let into your mind during the hours when your defenses are down. Read a quarterly earnings report. Read a book about business history. Read a biography of someone who built something over 30 years. These things make you a better investor. They build the mental frameworks that allow you to stay calm when markets get frightening. Financial television in the evening does the opposite. It makes you skittish. It makes you feel like a participant in something urgent when you should feel like an owner of something enduring. The third thing I changed was how I spent time actually thinking about my financial future. Most people do not think about their financial future. They worry about it. And thinking and worrying are not the same thing at all. Worrying is circular. It goes around and around the same problems without producing answers. Thinking is linear. It moves from where you are to where you want to be and tries to find the path between them. I started setting aside 30 minutes, 2 or 3 evenings a week to just sit quietly and think. No phone, no television, just a notebook and a question. Sometimes the question was about a specific investment. Sometimes it was broader. What am I actually trying to accomplish? What does financial independence look like for me specifically? What would have to be true for me to feel genuinely secure 20 years from now? Those sessions changed things for me, not because of any single insight, though there were insights, but because the act of sitting with these questions regularly trained my brain to think about money in a longer time frame. It pulled me out of the month-to-month anxiety that consumes most people and put me into a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year perspective. And when you think in that time frame, almost everything looks different. Let me give you a hypothetical. Imagine 2 people, same income, same age, 35, same amount in their investment accounts. One of them spends his evenings consuming financial media, making small reactive adjustments to his portfolio, worrying about the next quarter. The other one spends 2 evenings a week thinking about his actual goals, staying largely still, and adding consistently to a diversified portfolio of businesses he understands and believes in. 30 years later, the difference between these 2 people is not the market. The market is the same for both of them. The difference is behavior, and behavior compounds. Patience compounds. Clarity compounds. Just like interest, the fourth change I made was the one that felt the most counterintuitive at the time. I stopped trying to optimize every evening. There is a kind of person, and I've been this person, who turns rest itself into a productivity project. They track their sleep. They schedule their reading. They have a list of things to accomplish after work that would exhaust a person who hadn't already worked all day. And they feel virtuous about this. They feel like they are ahead, like they are winning some invisible competition with their own future. This is, in my experience, a form of anxiety wearing the costume of discipline. Real discipline, in investing and in life, is not about squeezing productivity from every available moment. It is about understanding the difference between the things that move the needle and the things that only feel like they do. Checking your portfolio 17 times a day does not move the needle. It creates the illusion of control while actually introducing emotional noise that degrades your decision-making. Having a consistent, coherent strategy that you review seriously once a month and then largely leave alone that moves the needle. Compounding does the work. Your job is to not interrupt it. So I started being more honest with myself about what rest actually meant. Not passive, not lazy, but genuinely restorative. A long walk, an unhurried meal with people I cared about, a novel that had nothing to do with money. And I noticed something. After an evening that genuinely restored me, my thinking the next morning was sharper. My patience was longer. My tolerance for short-term volatility was higher. I was better at everything that actually mattered in investing. Not because I had worked harder in the evening, because I had stopped working when working was no longer productive. The fifth thing I changed, and this is perhaps the most important, was who I spent my evenings with. Not in a cold, calculating way, but deliberately, thoughtfully. Because the people around you in your private hours are shaping how you think about money in ways so subtle that you almost never notice it happening. I have watched people with genuinely excellent financial instincts completely abandon their judgment because of social pressure. A friend mentions they've been making money in something speculative, and suddenly a sensible, patient investor is second-guessing a strategy that was working perfectly. Not because the strategy stopped working, because the social environment temporarily made patience feel like a mistake and speculation feel like wisdom. It goes the other way too. Spending your evenings around people who think about wealth creation seriously, people who read, who think long-term, who take their own financial futures as a genuine responsibility rather than something that will work itself out, that shifts you gradually but profoundly. You don't need a room full of wealthy people. You need conversations that challenge your thinking in useful directions. You need the occasional voice that says, "Have you thought about this for 5 years instead of 5 months?" You need the kind of intellectual companionship that makes short-term panic seem as unsophisticated as it actually is. And if those voices aren't available to you in person, find them in books. The biographies of patient, disciplined builders, the writing of people who have actually sat with long-time horizons and can describe what that feels like from the inside. There is no shortage of this material. There is only a shortage of the intention to seek it out. Now, I want to pause here, because everything I've said so far lands differently depending on one thing, and that thing is whether you actually believe that your evenings matter, whether you actually believe that the small, unglamorous, private hours of your ordinary life have meaningful power over your financial outcome. Most people don't fully believe this, not at the gut level. They understand it intellectually the same way they understand that exercise is good for them, but they don't feel it as urgent truth. They don't feel the weight of it. So let me try to make you feel it. Think about the concept of compound interest. You probably know what it is. The idea that money earns returns, and those returns earn returns, and over decades, this becomes something almost absurdly large from a modest starting point. Albert Einstein is sometimes credited with calling it the eighth wonder of the world, though whether he actually said it is debatable. What isn't debatable is that the math is staggering. A single dollar invested at a reasonable return for 40 years becomes something that bears almost no resemblance to a single dollar. But here's what nobody talks about, clearly enough. Your habits compound exactly the same way: the habit of waiting before acting, the habit of thinking before reacting, the habit of consuming information deliberately, the habit of resting genuinely, the habit of surrounding yourself with serious thinking. These are not poetic suggestions. They are behavioral investments, and they compound. Slowly at first, imperceptibly. And then at some point, the gap between you and the version of yourself who never made these changes becomes so wide that it startles you. I am not talking about becoming someone else. I am talking about becoming more fully what you already have the capacity to be. Patient, clear-eyed, calm in the face of uncertainty, capable of making good decisions, not because the decisions are easy, but because you have built the mental and emotional infrastructure to make them well. That infrastructure is built in the evenings, in the quiet, in the seemingly small choices about what to watch and what to read and who to talk to and when to put the phone down. Let me tell you about a man I once knew. I'll call him David, though that isn't his name. David worked as a mid-level manager at a manufacturing company in Ohio for 35 years. He never earned a spectacular salary. He never invested in anything exotic. He never had a tip from the right person or got into something at the right time. What David did was remarkably simple and remarkably consistent. He spent his evenings the same way, year after year. He read about businesses. He thought carefully before making any financial decision. He made maybe 2 or 3 investment moves per year, each one considered for weeks. He almost never watched financial news. He went to bed early. When David retired quietly without fanfare, he had accumulated something that most of his colleagues, many of whom earned more than he did, had not. Not just money, though he had that too. He had clarity. He had a relationship with his own financial life that was calm and confident rather than anxious and reactive. He knew what he had, why he had it, and what it would allow him to do. And none of it came from a single brilliant decision. It came from 35 years of decent evenings. That is available to you right now, not tomorrow. Not when the market is better or when you get a raise or when things calm down. Right now, with what you have, the habit of a better evening is available to you immediately. So what does this actually look like in practice? Let me make it concrete, because abstraction is the enemy of change. It looks like a rule that says no financial decisions after 8 o'clock. It looks like turning off the financial news by 7 and picking up something that builds your thinking over years rather than agitating it over minutes. It looks like 30 minutes, twice a week, alone with your thoughts and a notebook and the single most important financial question you haven't let yourself sit with properly. What am I actually trying to build? What is this all for? What would I have to do consistently for 10 years to get there? It looks like honoring the difference between rest that restores you and distraction that depletes you. It looks like being deliberate about who gets access to your private hours. And it looks like patience, not the passive, helpless kind, but the active, confident kind that comes from knowing why you're waiting and what you're waiting for. None of this is complicated. All of it is hard. Not in the way that climbing a mountain is hard, but in the way that doing the same quiet thing day after day, when nothing dramatic is happening, when nobody is watching, when the short-term noise is loud and the long-term signal is almost inaudible, that is the hardest thing in investing. And it is done or not done in the evenings. I want to close with something that I believe as deeply as anything I know about building a financial life. The market does not reward the most excited person in the room. It does not reward the most anxious person or the most active or the person with the most tabs open on their laptop at 11 o'clock at night. Over time, and over time is the only time frame that matters, the market rewards the person who understood what they owned, believed in it, and was willing to wait. Who could sit with uncertainty without letting it drive them to action. Who was, in the quiet of their own life, patient in a way that other people found almost baffling. That patience is not a gift. It is not a personality type. It is a practice. And like all practices, it begins somewhere small. It begins with a decision about how to spend the next evening. And the one after that, and the one after that, the version of you that exists 20 years from now will look back at this period. And what that version of you will see is not the market conditions of this year, or the interest rates, or the headlines. That version of you will see choices. Small, daily, ordinary choices made in the quiet hours after work. Choices about what to read and what to ignore, about when to act and when to wait, about who to listen to and who to tune out. Make those choices carefully. Make them as if they matter, because they do. They always have.